In a forgotten village, an unknown girl believed she had been chosen for an impossible mission.
She had no rank and no military education, yet an entire army began to follow her.
She helped change the fate of France, then found herself abandoned and judged. How did everything turn against her?
In the winter landscape of northeastern France, where the Meuse River moved quietly between fields and wooded hills, stood the village of Domremy. Here, around 1412, a girl named Joan was born to Jacques d'Arc and Isabelle Romy. The exact day of her birth is unknown. A later tradition placed it on the Feast of the Epiphany, but the evidence is too uncertain to treat that date as fact. Joan did not enter the world as a princess, soldier, or prophesied savior. Her family was rural, but not as poor as later legends sometimes imagined. Jacques d'Arc farmed land and performed minor duties for the village. Isabelle Romy taught her daughter the prayers and practices of a Catholic household. Joan learned to spin wool, sew, help at home, and sometimes tend animals. She probably received no formal education and could not read or write in her youth. Domremy was not sheltered from the violence-consuming France. The 100 Years' War had become entangled with a French civil conflict involving the powerful Dukes of Burgundy. The Treaty of Troyes in 1420 recognized Henry V of England as heir to King Charles VI and disinherited the king's son, the Dauphin Charles. When both kings died in 1422, an infant English king and the Dauphin stood at the center of rival claims to France. To villagers, arguments over law and bloodline arrived as armed men, stolen cattle, burned crops, taxes, and fear. Domremy generally supported the Dauphin, though nearby communities favored Burgundy. Raids reached the area during Joan's childhood. In 1428, the inhabitants temporarily fled to Neufchâteau while soldiers devastated the countryside. War was no longer distant. It had entered the fields around her home. Years later, during her trial at Rouen, Joan said she was about 13 when she first heard what she called a voice from God. It came, she recalled, around midday in summer in her father's garden, accompanied by a bright light. She was frightened. Over time, she identified the figures speaking to her as Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. No surviving evidence can prove what Joan heard or saw. The fullest account comes from Joan herself under hostile interrogation in 1431, supplemented by witnesses questioned decades later. History can establish that she repeatedly described these experiences and that they shaped her actions. Their supernatural origin belongs to faith, not to something historical method can confirm. At first, Joan said, the voice instructed her to behave well and attend church. Gradually, the message became political and dangerous. She must aid the Dauphin Charles and help restore him to his kingdom. Joan resisted. She later remembered answering that she was only a poor girl who knew neither how to ride nor how to fight. By May 1428, conviction had overcome hesitation. With the help of a relative, Durand Laxart, Joan traveled to the fortified town of Vaucouleurs and asked its captain, Robert de Baudricourt, to send her to the Dauphin. To the experienced soldier, the request sounded impossible. He dismissed her and told her escort to take her home. Joan returned to Domremy. France remained divided, the Dauphin remained uncrowned, and no army waited for her. Yet the village girl had crossed an invisible boundary. The voices were no longer private. Her mission had been spoken aloud. Part 2, The Road to Chinon. Robert de Baudricourt's refusal did not end Joan's mission. It sent her back toward a countryside becoming more dangerous with each passing month. By autumn 1428, English forces had begun the siege of Orléans. The city guarded the approaches to lands still loyal to Charles, the uncrowned heir known as the Dauphin. If Orléans fell, his position could become desperate. Yet in Domremy, Joan possessed no title, money, or authority. She had only the conviction that she must reach him. In January 1429, she returned to Vaucouleurs and stayed with the cartwright Henri Leroyer and his wife, Catherine. Later testimony describes Joan arriving in a worn red dress and repeatedly asking Robert de Baudricourt for an escort. The captain remained cautious. A teenage peasant claiming divine instructions might be a fraud, a visionary, or a danger to anyone who supported her. Joan's persistence nevertheless attracted allies. Jean de Metz, a soldier in the local garrison, questioned her about her purpose. She told him that she would reach Charles even if the journey wore her feet away, though she would rather have remained at home spinning beside her mother. As remembered years later, her words suggested not a desire for adventure, but obedience to a duty she believed she could no longer refuse. Jean de Metz pledged to help her. Bertrand de Poulengy, another soldier, also offered support. People in Vaucouleurs contributed clothing and equipment, and a horse was obtained. Joan's unlikely proposal was slowly becoming a real expedition. Later accounts connect Robert de Baudricourt's change of mind with the Battle of the Herrings, fought near Orléans on February 12, 1429. According to this tradition, Joan spoke of a French defeat before news reached Vaucouleurs. The battle is certain, the prediction is less secure. It survives in testimony and chronicles recorded after the event, and historians cannot establish precisely what Joan said or when. Whatever persuaded Robert de Baudricourt, he finally allowed the journey to proceed. For the road, Joan exchanged her dress for male clothing suited to riding. This was not yet the polished armor familiar from later paintings. Such garments made travel easier and may have protected her while sleeping among armed men. The decision would later become a central accusation at her trial. Near the end of February, Joan departed with a small escort: Jean de Metz, Bertrand de Poulengy, a royal messenger, an archer, and 2 servants. They traveled for 11 days through territories divided among French, English, and Burgundian loyalties. Jean de Metz later recalled that they rode mostly at night because hostile forces controlled the roads. The exact route cannot be reconstructed with certainty. What remains is the outline of a secret winter passage across rivers and disputed ground, made by 7 riders who could never know whether the next village would shelter or betray them. Joan wished to hear Mass along the way, but avoiding recognition limited their stops. At St. Catherine de Fierbois, near the end of the journey, she worshipped and sent word ahead to the royal court. On or about March 6, 1429, the towers of Chinon rose before them. Somewhere within the fortress waited Charles and a council wary of miracles, impostors, and political traps. Joan had crossed the dangerous road. She had not yet crossed the greater distance between a village girl's conviction and the acceptance of a prince. Part 3: The Test of the Court. On March 8, 1429, Joan entered the royal residence at Chinon. She was about 17. The Dauphin and his advisors had every reason to distrust her. The meeting soon gathered layers of legend. The most famous version says Charles hid among the courtiers while another man took his place, yet Joan recognized the true prince. Sources do not agree. One early report suggests Charles entered from another chamber after courtiers tried to misdirect her. A witness present at Chinon later mentioned no elaborate disguise. Joan herself said she had written in advance that she would recognize Charles. It is safest to say that she identified him, while the theatrical test familiar from paintings cannot be confirmed. Joan knelt before the Dauphin and declared that she had come to raise the siege of Orléans and lead him to Reims for his coronation. They then spoke privately. Their conversation impressed Charles, but its content remains unknown. Later witnesses claim Joan revealed a secret concerning his legitimacy or a private prayer. Recorded years afterward, these explanations cannot be verified. During her trial, Joan refused to disclose the matter fully, saying it concerned the king. Charles did not immediately give her an army. Supporting a supposed divine messenger might strengthen his cause, but accepting a fraud could expose his court to ridicule and religious danger. Joan was lodged in the Tower of Coudray while her companions were questioned. The council then sent her to Poitiers, where theologians, lawyers, and clergy examined her claims. For roughly 3 weeks, Joan faced repeated questioning. The original record, known as the Book of Poitiers, has been lost. What survives comes from fragments repeated during her 1431 trial and from witnesses at the later nullification proceedings. A full transcript cannot be reconstructed. The examiners questioned Joan about her voices, faith, conduct, and the sign that would prove her mission. She offered no miracle inside the chamber. Her answer was dangerous. Take her to Orléans and the lifting of the siege would be the sign. When a theologian argued that God would not need soldiers, she reportedly replied that the soldiers would fight and God would grant victory. The clergy did not certify that Joan had been sent by God. Their conclusion was narrower. They found no clear evidence of heresy or evil, judged her life favorably, and advised that Charles could lawfully use her help. Orléans would serve as the test. Women connected to the royal household also examined Joan and reported that she was a virgin, a matter considered significant within the beliefs of the period. Accounts differ over whether this occurred at Poitiers or Tours. By early April, the court began transforming the traveler from Domremy into a military figure. A suit of armor was ordered for her at considerable cost. A small household was assembled, including a squire, pages, heralds, and a chaplain. At Tours, a white standard was painted with religious imagery and the names of Jesus and Mary. Armor could not provide experience, and a banner could not force veteran soldiers to obey a peasant girl. Yet the court had taken the decisive risk. Joan had arrived at Chinon asking to be heard. She would leave with attendants, armor, and a place beside the army gathering to relieve Orléans. The promised sign would no longer be debated in a quiet room. It would be tested beneath the walls of a besieged city. Part 4: The Siege of Orléans. In late April 1429, Joan joined a convoy at Blois carrying supplies and soldiers to Orléans. Joan ordered the English commanders to abandon the siege. They had no intention of obeying a teenage girl claiming to speak in God's name. The French captains avoided the strongest English positions and approached from the south. Joan had expected to confront the besiegers from the north and protested to John of Dunois, the defender of Orléans. Their disagreement revealed an important truth. Joan inspired the expedition, but veteran officers still controlled its movements. Boats carried Joan, troops, and supplies across the Loire. On the evening of April 29th, she entered Orléans by torchlight. Crowds pressed around her horse, hoping the woman in armor would end months of fear. Her arrival changed nothing by magic. What changed immediately was morale. Citizens who had expected defeat began to believe action was possible. On May 4th, French forces attacked the eastern English Bastille of Saint-Lô. Joan was absent when the fighting began but hurried to the field after hearing the alarm. The fort fell after several hours. Some English soldiers seeking refuge near a church were reportedly spared at her request. Fighting paused on May 5th for the Feast of the Ascension and resumed the next morning south of the Loire. French troops and armed citizens attacked positions near Saint-Jean-le-Blanc and the Augustinian monastery. The operation nearly collapsed when part of the force retreated. Joan helped rally the men, though accounts differ over the details. By nightfall, the Augustines' position had fallen, isolating the defenders around the bridge fortress of the Tourelles. The decisive assault began on May 7th. 4 hours, French soldiers attacked walls and ditches under English fire. Joan was struck by an arrow between the neck and shoulder. The wound was painful but not fatal. She withdrew briefly, received treatment, and returned to the fighting. Late in the day, Dunois considered ending the assault. According to his testimony years later, Joan asked him to wait. She prayed, returned with her standard, and stood near the ditch. The French renewed their attack. The English defense broke and the Tourelles fell. William Glassdale, an English commander who had mocked Joan, died in the Loire while attempting to cross the damaged bridge. Later retellings placed Joan at the center of every decision, but the victory belonged to a combined force. Experienced captains planned operations, soldiers and city militia endured the assaults, boatmen made the crossings possible. Joan pressed for action, remained visible under fire, and gave frightened men a reason to return. On May 8th, the remaining English forces abandoned their forts north of the river and formed for battle outside the city. The French also assembled, but neither side attacked. After a tense pause, the English marched away. The siege, lasting nearly 7 months, was over. Orléans did not end English power in France. Nearby towns remained in English hands, and the wider war was undecided. Yet the result transformed Joan's position. The sign proposed at Poitiers had apparently been delivered. The siege was lifted only 9 days after she entered the city. Church bells rang and a Thanksgiving procession moved through the streets. Joan had arrived as an untested visionary. She left Orléans as the symbol of a French cause that had suddenly remembered how victory felt. Part 5: The Loire Campaign. After Orléans, Joan urged Charles to march toward Reims. A coronation in the traditional cathedral would strengthen his disputed claim to the throne. The royal council hesitated. English garrisons still controlled important towns and bridges along the Loire, threatening any army moving north. In June 1429, a new force gathered under John, Duke of Alençon, joined by John of Dunois, La Hire, and other captains. Joan rode with them as the campaign's most visible figure. But command remained shared among noblemen and professional soldiers. Their first target was Jargeau. The English rejected a demand to surrender, and French artillery bombarded the walls. On June 12, the army stormed the town. Accounts describe a stone striking Joan's helmet near a scaling ladder and knocking her down. She survived and returned to the assault. Jargeau fell and the Earl of Suffolk was captured. The victory was swift but brutal. Towns taken by assault could be looted, and defenders killed after the walls were breached. Joan sometimes tried to protect prisoners, but she could not remove the violence from medieval warfare. The army moved west. On June 15, the French seized the important bridge at Meung-sur-Loire without capturing its strongly defended castle. The next day they advanced on Beaugency. After bombardment and negotiation, the English garrison surrendered on June 17 and received safe conduct. An English relief force approached under John Talbot and John Fastolfe. On June 18, the armies came close near Patay. English longbowmen had destroyed French knights in earlier battles by fighting behind stakes and prepared positions. At Patay, they had little time to establish those defenses before French scouts discovered them. One chronicle says a stag revealed their position, but this cannot be confirmed. French cavalry attacked before the English were ready. English archers were overwhelmed, many soldiers were killed or captured, and John Talbot became a prisoner. John Fastolfe escaped with part of the force. Casualty estimates vary widely, and claims of extremely low French losses should be treated cautiously. Joan was present, but Patay was not a battle she personally directed from beginning to end. The cavalry vanguard made the decisive charge, while senior captains controlled the pursuit. Her importance lay partly in the confidence surrounding the campaign. Only weeks earlier, the French had acted defensively. Now they moved rapidly from one objective to another. Within 6 days, Jargeau had fallen, Meung's bridge had been seized, Beaugency had surrendered, and an English field army had been defeated. The Loire crossings were largely open to Charles's forces. The aura of English superiority, built through decades of French defeats, had been badly damaged. Victory also created tension. Joan wanted to escort Charles to Reims, while some advisors preferred safer campaigns or negotiation. The route crossed territories influenced by Burgundy, and several walled towns might refuse entry. The army needed supplies, political cooperation, and the presence of a cautious prince. Joan returned to Charles with a simple demand. It was time to begin the journey to his coronation. Orléans had tested her promise. The Loire campaign showed that the victory was not an isolated accident. For the first time, the road toward Reims seemed possible. But it led through hostile country, uncertain loyalties, and cities whose gates were still closed. Part 6. The Road to Reims. On June 29, 1429, Charles and his army left Gien for Reims. Much of Champagne lay under Burgundian influence. Auxerre refused to admit Charles but provided supplies. Every closed gate raised the same question. Could an uncrowned prince cross territory that did not accept him? The greatest obstacle was Troyes. 9 years earlier, the Treaty of Troyes had recognized Henry V of England and his heirs as successors to the French crown, disinheriting Charles. Now the man rejected by that treaty stood outside the city with the woman promising to make him king. Troyes closed its gates. The French lacked provisions and equipment for a long siege. Some advisors considered bypassing the city. Later testimony presents Joan promising that Troyes would submit within days. The words were recorded long afterward, but her determination to continue is well supported. Joan helped prepare for an assault. Soldiers carried timber and brush toward the ditches, while artillery was positioned near the walls. Whether Troyes feared attack, internal division, or isolation after the Loire victories, its leaders chose negotiation. The city agreed to receive Charles on July 9, and the army entered the next day without a major assault. The surrender showed that Burgundian-aligned towns might change sides. Chalons opened its gates soon afterward. There Joan met people from the region of Domremy. For a moment, the extraordinary campaign touched the rural world she had left months before. On July 16, Charles reached Reims, which submitted without battle. The next day he entered Reims Cathedral. The sacred oil associated with French coronations was brought from the Abbey of Saint Remy. Before clergy, nobles, soldiers, and citizens, the Dauphin was anointed and crowned as Charles VII. Joan stood nearby holding her standard. At her trial, she reportedly said the banner deserved the honor because it had shared the hardship. The phrase survives through a hostile judicial record, but it captures the moment. The banner carried through arrows and smoke at Orléans now stood inside the cathedral. Later accounts describe Joan kneeling before Charles and declaring that God's will had been fulfilled. The scene may be accurate, but its language is uncertain. Her two objectives had nevertheless been achieved. Orléans had been relieved and Charles had been crowned at Reims. The ceremony did not end the war. The English still claimed the French throne for Henry VI, while Paris and much of northern France remained outside Charles's control. Burgundy had not been defeated, and an anointing could not replace armies or diplomacy. Yet medieval kingship depended upon more than territory. Reims connected Charles to generations of French rulers and weakened the image of him as merely the disinherited Dauphin. For his supporters, he had received sacred confirmation of kingship in its traditional place. For Joan, the ceremony was the summit of everything that began in Domremy. In less than 5 months, she had traveled from an obscure village to the center of a royal cathedral. Success created a question her original mission had not answered. If Charles was now crowned, what should Joan do next? She could return home, continue the war, or press toward Paris while confidence remained high. The bells of Reims proclaimed fulfillment. Beyond their sound, the road ahead was dividing between Joan's desire for action and the king's preference for negotiation. Part 7. The Closed Gates of Paris. After the coronation, Joan wanted to move against Paris. Charles VII instead negotiated with Philip the Good, Duke of Burgundy, hoping to separate him from the English alliance without another costly campaign. A truce was arranged. Joan obeyed reluctantly. In a surviving letter to Reims, she wrote that she disliked such truces and feared deception. But Charles's policy was not simply cowardice. Burgundy possessed extensive territory and military power. Peace with Philip could achieve what battles had not. After an indecisive confrontation with Anglo-Burgundian forces near Montpellier on August 26, Joan and John, Duke of Alençon, occupied Saint-Denis, north of Paris. Paris was not merely an unwilling French city held by foreigners. Its government supported the Anglo-Burgundian regime, and many residents feared the Armagnac forces of Charles VII. Memories of civil violence remained strong. To Joan, Paris belonged to its rightful king. To many inside its walls, her army threatened revenge and pillage. By early September, French troops camped near the northern approaches. Charles did not provide the equipment required for a long siege. Joan and the Duke of Alençon nevertheless prepared an assault. On September 8, French forces attacked the Porte Saint-Honoré. Artillery fired while soldiers moved against the walls. Paris possessed deep ditches, including an inner moat filled with water. The defenders answered with arrows, crossbow bolts, stones, and gunfire. Joan stood near the ditch with her standard, urging soldiers forward and searching for a crossing. The attack continued for hours without securing the gate. A crossbow bolt struck Joan in the thigh. She remained until evening, still calling for the assault to continue, before companions carried her away. Casualty figures are unreliable. The French suffered heavily and failed to enter the city. Parisian defenders remained organized, while the attackers lacked the preparation that had supported earlier victories. Joan wanted to renew the attack. Charles ordered a withdrawal. A temporary bridge intended for another approach was dismantled by command. On September 13, the retreat from Saint-Denis began, and the coronation army was soon disbanded. Later admirers described this as a betrayal. The evidence reveals a conflict of strategy rather than a simple plot. Joan believed speed and pressure could break English and Burgundian power. Charles preferred negotiation and gradual political recovery. His caution later contributed to lasting success. But in September 1429 it ended Joan's chance to attack Paris with a major royal force. Before leaving Saint-Denis, Joan placed her armor in the abbey church as an offering, following a warrior's custom. The details are uncertain, but the act marked the end of the triumphant campaign begun at Orléans. Failure changed how others viewed her. Victory had made her claims appear confirmed. Defeat allowed opponents to question them. Yet Paris did not make her earlier achievements illusions. It showed that courage could not overcome fortified walls, determined inhabitants, divided leadership, and poor preparation. 5 months earlier, Joan had struggled to find an escort to Chinon. She had since seen Orléans liberated and Charles crowned. Now, for the first time, her demand for action had been refused. The gates of Paris remained closed. The doors of royal power were beginning to close around Joan as well. Part 8. The Road to Captivity. After the retreat from Paris, Joan of Arc remained famous, but her position had changed. She still served Charles VII, yet no longer stood at the center of a royal campaign. The king returned to negotiation, while Joan was directed towards smaller operations. In autumn 1429, she joined an attempt to capture La Chérite-sur-Loire, a town held by forces allied with the English. The army lacked food, money, and siege equipment. Winter approached, and in December the French withdrew, leaving artillery behind. It was a second failure after Paris, revealing the limits of courage without supplies and royal support. In spring 1430, Joan returned to the field with a small company. Whether she left without royal permission is uncertain. The records do not prove a break with Charles. She now had fewer soldiers and less protection than during the march to Reims. At Melun, Joan later testified, her voices warned that she would be captured before midsummer, without revealing the place or hour. Because this was recorded only after her capture, its timing cannot be confirmed. The immediate danger lay at Compiègne. The city had resisted Burgundian control, and Duke Philip the Good was preparing to force its submission. On May 23, 1430, Joan entered with several hundred troops. That afternoon, she joined a sortie across the Oise River against Burgundian positions near Margny. The attack began well, but enemy reinforcements appeared. The French retreat narrowed toward the bridge into the city. Joan stayed near the rear to cover the withdrawal. As Burgundian soldiers closed around her, the drawbridge was raised. Later writers accused Guillaume de Flavy, Compiègne's captain, of deliberately shutting Joan outside. No surviving evidence proves this. Raising the bridge may have stopped the enemy from entering with the retreating soldiers. Flavy continued defending the city for months, making a simple story of betrayal difficult to sustain. Joan was pulled from her horse and surrendered to a soldier serving Jean de Luxembourg, a Burgundian nobleman. For the first time since leaving Domremy, she no longer controlled her journey. She was moved between castles and guarded as a valuable prisoner. At Beaurevoir, she tried to escape by jumping from a tower onto the dry ground below. She survived but was injured. During her trial, Joan said she feared delivery to the English and had heard that Compiègne might be destroyed. She also admitted that her voices had told her not to jump. The English negotiated to obtain her. Bishop Pierre Cauchon, a French churchman allied with their government, played a central role. Jean de Luxembourg eventually transferred Joan for 10,000 livres tournois, an enormous ransom. Calling it a sale captures its brutality, although the exchange followed wartime practice. No surviving evidence shows that Charles VII made a serious effort to ransom or rescue her. This encouraged accusations that he abandoned her. Yet it does not prove he arranged her capture. An intervention in Burgundian territory was difficult. By the end of 1430, Joan had been taken to Rouen, the center of English power in occupied France. Her enemies did not intend merely to imprison a defeated soldier. If they could condemn her as a heretic or fraud, they could also attack the sacred meaning of Charles VI's coronation. The teenage warrior who had led a king toward his cathedral was now carried in chains toward a courtroom prepared by his enemies. Part 9. The Trial of the Maid. In Rouen, Joan of Arc was confined inside Bouvrouil Castle, guarded by English soldiers and kept in chains. Her trial was presented as a church proceeding. Yet she remained in a military prison rather than an ecclesiastical one, where women would normally have guarded her. Joan requested church custody. It was refused. Investigations began in January 1431. The presiding judge was Pierre Cauchon, Bishop of Beauvais, whose career was tied to the English occupation. The English financed the proceedings, and many clerics came from territory under their control. The court was not politically neutral. Condemning Joan could weaken the belief that God had guided Charles VII to his coronation. Public questioning began on February 21st. Joan was about 19, unable to read, and had no legal advocate. Facing her were theologians and canon lawyers. They asked about her voices, standard, clothing, and obedience to the church. Some questions were traps. Asked whether she was in divine grace, Joan replied that if she was not, she prayed God would place her there. If she was, she prayed God would keep her there. The transcript shows that Joan sometimes hesitated or refused to answer. Yet she also displayed caution and intelligence. She distinguished the universal church from the judges before her, who were allied with her enemies. She wished to obey the church but would not deny the mission she believed came from God. Her male clothing became a central issue. During the campaigns, it was practical for riding, armor, and life among soldiers. In prison, tightly fastened clothing may have offered protection while she was guarded by men. Later witnesses said she feared sexual assault. The full circumstances remain uncertain. The accusations were reduced to 12 articles. They described her visions as false or demonic, her resistance as disobedience, and her clothing as a rejection of religious order. Her actions in war were transformed into evidence of heresy. On May 9, Joan was shown instruments of torture and threatened with their use. She did not change her testimony, and the judges went no further. Even without physical torture, she remained isolated, chained, and under severe pressure. On May 24, Joan was taken to a platform beside St. Ouen Church, faced with immediate execution. She accepted an abjuration, a formal renunciation of her alleged errors, and agreed to wear women's clothing. What she understood remains disputed. The official record contains a long confession, while later witnesses remembered a shorter document. Joan could not read it, so whether the surviving text represents what she accepted is uncertain. Her death sentence was replaced with perpetual imprisonment, but she returned to the same cell under English guards. Within days she was again wearing male clothing. The trial record says she resumed it deliberately. Later witnesses claimed her dress had been removed, leaving male clothing as her only option, or that she wore it for protection. Recorded years later, these accounts do not prove the exact sequence. On May 28, Joan withdrew key parts of her abjuration. She said she had denied the truth because she feared the fire and that her voices had reproached her. The court now called her a relapsed heretic, someone who returned to condemned beliefs after renouncing them. The trial had created the legal path to her death. The English had captured Joan's body at Compiègne. In Rouen, their court had worked to capture the meaning of her life. Part 10: The Fire and the Legacy. On May 30, 1431, Joan of Arc was taken from her cell in Rouen. She was about 19. The church court declared her a relapsed heretic and handed her to secular authority. She was led to the old marketplace where the stake waited. Later testimony describes Joan asking for a cross and calling upon the name of Jesus. Individual details cannot all be verified equally, but several observers support the broad outline of her final moments. After Joan was burned, her remains were reduced to ashes and thrown into the Seine. This prevented a grave from becoming a place of pilgrimage. Her captors had destroyed the prisoner. They could not so easily destroy what she had changed. Charles VII remained king. Joan's death did not reverse his coronation or end the war. France's victory depended on forces beyond one person. In 1435, Charles made peace with Philip the Good of Burgundy through the Treaty of Arras, breaking the alliance supporting English power. Paris returned to Charles the following year. Military reform, professional troops, and artillery strengthened France. By 1453, England had lost nearly all its French territories except Calais. Joan did not win the 100 Years' War alone. She did not design the later reforms or fight in the final campaigns. Her contribution came at a critical moment. She helped restore confidence, encouraged action at Orléans, and drove the campaign that brought Charles to Reims. Those achievements changed the political imagination of the conflict. After Charles recovered Rouen, questions surrounding Joan's trial became unavoidable. An inquiry began in 1450. Joan's mother, Isabel Romy, and her brothers later sought to clear her name. Pope Calixtus III authorized an investigation, which heard from people who had known Joan or participated in her trial. On July 7, 1456, the appellate court declared the proceedings of 1431 unjust and legally invalid. The conviction, abjuration, and consequences of the sentence were annulled. This was not canonization, nor did it answer every theological question about Joan's voices. It removed the official stain of heresy from her family. On May 16, 1920, the Catholic Church canonized Joan. By then, monarchists had claimed her as a defender of kingship, Republicans as a daughter of the people resisting occupation, and Catholics as a model of faith and martyrdom. Later political movements, including some on the far right, also reshaped her image for their own purposes. These competing versions can hide the historical person. Joan was neither a passive instrument of powerful men nor the solitary savior of France. She was a young woman of intense faith making consequential choices within a brutal war. She inspired soldiers, challenged social expectations, accepted violence as part of her mission, and sometimes made judgments that ended in failure. Historians cannot prove a supernatural origin for her voices. Attempts to diagnose her across 6 centuries remain speculative. The records show that she believed her mission was real, acted on that belief with extraordinary persistence, and forced kings, soldiers, clergy, and enemies to respond. Her public life lasted little more than 2 years. Yet she crossed the distance from a village to a royal cathedral, from battlefield to prison, and from condemned heretic to one of history's most contested saints. The flames at Rouen ended Joan of Arc's life. They did not end the argument over what that life meant.